Some major breaking news just into us with former President Donald Trump now facing new charges in the special counsel's investigation into those classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago. We are getting some significant new information from what's being called a superseding indictment, essentially additional information that the special counsel's office is now revealing. And it is new insight here into what specifically is being alleged related to what you just heard Laura and Lester and Danny and our team talking about. And that is the allegation that Carlos de Oliveira, identified as a property manager, a kind of maintenance worker at Mar-a-Lago, along with Walt Nada, Mr. Trump's body man, and Mr. Trump himself, tried to delete surveillance footage at Mar-a-Lago in the summer of 2022. I want to bring in NBC News correspondent Tom Winter, who's covering this, and our NBC News legal analyst, Kristen Kibben-Feddens. And Tom, I want to share with our audience something that is revealed in this indictment. This indictment alleges that Carlos de Oliveira talked to a different Trump employee after telling this employee, and this is that their conversation should remain just between the two of them, that, and I'm quoting here, that, quote unquote, the boss wanted the server deleted.
All right, everyone, John here. So this happening right now, behind Trump's public dominance lies a turbulent private history. Both Ivana Trump and Marla Maples have described the painful collapse of their marriages to him. Ivana spent 15 years building the Trump organization before being publicly humiliated, and Marla went from being the other woman to wife number 2, leaving with a daughter and decades of complicated feelings. Taken together, the stories of these two women reveal more about who Donald Trump actually is as a human being than any policy paper, any campaign speech, or any carefully staged photo opportunity ever could. And recently, these stories have resurfaced in a big way, drawing attention back to the personal history that shaped the man who now occupies the most powerful office in the world. So let's talk about all of it, because if you really want to understand the person running the country, you need to understand what happened behind the closed doors of his marriages.
This employee responded he wouldn't know how to do that. He didn't think he would have the rights to do that. That employee said, you're going to have to reach out to somebody else, essentially. And then de Oliveira then, I'm quoting, de Oliveira then insisted to this other employee that the boss wanted the server deleted and asked, what are we going to do? And that is just a piece of the indictment, Tom, that is describing part of this new information that we're just learning this evening.
Yeah, it is really stunning behavior here. And it's not just de Oliveira and Nada that are tied up in this. De Oliveira is being charged alongside the former president. And they specifically say that Trump was involved in this effort to delete this particular server. To your point, Hallie, apparently this occurred on June 27th at 9:48 a.m. De Oliveira walked into the IT office where an unnamed Trump employee was working with somebody in the IT department. De Oliveira requested that he step away. They went into some sort of an audio closet, and once inside that space, he told them that the conversation needed to stay between the two of them, and that the boss, as you said, wanted the server deleted, and that's believed to be...
The women who were inside those doors have had quite a lot to say, and their voices carry a weight that no political commentary can match. Let's begin with Marla, because her story is the one that has been brought back into public conversation most recently. But before we dive into what she has said, it's worth establishing who she actually is and what her relationship with Trump looked like at its peak. Most people only know the scandalous headline version, the woman who broke up the Trump marriage, the tabloid sensation, the blonde who made a certain infamous comment about her relationship with a married man. But the full story is far more interesting and far more human than those headlines suggest. Marla Ann Maples was born in a tiny town in Georgia with a population of just over 600 people.
The surveillance camera video, that's according to other sections of this charging document. So it's clear here, and the special counsel says, we're looking at it on screen right now, the back and forth that's contained in these allegations. It's clear here that this occurred shortly after a subpoena was served for this video. This is very damning evidence, Hallie. And looking at this, if there was not such a threat of the clock, if you will, and we were just listening to our colleague Laura Jarrett talk about it, the idea that there's an effort to get this trial moving because of the election deadline in 2024. If you were looking at this and it didn't involve Donald Trump, it involved 3 people we hadn't heard about before, I think they would be saying uncle at this point, because the level of detail and evidence that they have appears to be growing stronger by the day. And the question now is whether De Oliveira and Nauta decide that their lives would be better working with the special counsel's office than being charged by it. I'm not somebody, and you know this over the last.
She was, by all accounts, an overachiever from a very young age, a good student, an athlete, a homecoming queen who went on to attend the University of Georgia before heading to New York City to pursue a career in entertainment. She was working as a model and actress when she met Donald Trump at a celebrity tennis tournament in the mid-1980s. She was just 21 years old at the time. He was 38 and still very much married to Ivana. What followed was an affair that continued for years before it exploded into public view in the most dramatic possible fashion. A confrontation at a ski resort in Aspen, Colorado, that Ivana Trump would spend the rest of her life describing in vivid, painful detail. The affair became an absolute tabloid sensation. Marla's name was everywhere. She was the woman who had torn apart one of the most visible marriages in New York City, and rather than retreating from the spotlight, she navigated it as best she could, eventually marrying Trump several years later.
8-9 years that we've talked and worked together, I'm not somebody who's always focused on, who's going to flip, who's going to cooperate. But I think in this particular instance, you're looking at somebody who might be motivated, and it's clear that they have other people that are talking to them. That's the special counsel's office. It's clear they have other people relaying these conversations, and they're putting a lot of weight on them here. These are pretty significant additional charges to this case.
There's also a sort of an intriguing breadcrumb that is dropped in this indictment, and I haven't finished the whole thing as we've been live on the air, Tom, but on June 23rd last summer in the evening, this indictment specifically states that Donald Trump then at some point called Carlos de Oliveira, they say 8:45 at night, and they spoke for about a half an hour. That is roughly 4 days before this conversation inside, as you described, the sort of quiet, private conversation that de Oliveira wanted to have with another employee about the boss wanting the server to be deleted. It seems as though the special counsel, the prosecutors here, are trying to draw a linkage, right? Throw down some breadcrumbs, pull that needle, thread that through.
Oh, 100%. And they clearly have De Oliveira's phone records because they have records of Trump calling De Oliveira at 3:55 on the date of, I just want to make sure I'm accurate here, on June 27th. So they have the phone conversations between Trump and De Oliveira. And so I think that that's significant that they had that level of a phone conversation, again, putting more links on the idea of De Oliveira doing this for Trump, according to their allegations.
Their daughter was born just 2 months before the wedding, and that daughter's recent arrival of her own child, Trump's latest grandchild, serves as a reminder that the complicated family tapestry woven from all those years of personal upheaval is still very much alive and still growing. But let's focus on Marla's story, because it came roaring back into public view in a wave of coverage that revisited her reflections on her marriage to and divorce from Donald Trump. The interviews and features that circulated painted a picture of a woman who has spent years quietly processing a very public wound. She described those years of tabloid coverage and divorce proceedings as, in her own words, such a painful time, adding that all those years in the press pretty much ripped my heart out. That is a striking phrase from someone describing her marriage to a man who is now the most powerful person in the entire country. When Marla married Trump in a lavish ceremony attended by more than 1,000 guests, she was 29 years old and already the most famous other woman in America. Their affair had been tabloid fodder for years. Their daughter had been born just 2 months before the wedding, and the marriage itself, which lasted about 6 years, ended quietly, without the explosive drama of Trump's first divorce. But it ended all the same. Marla took their young daughter and moved to Los Angeles, hoping the child could grow up in a place where her name would not make her such a standout, where they would not be followed around constantly. She wanted a quieter life. She got one mostly, but the feelings from those years stayed with her. She told interviewers she had believed she could change Trump, that she thought their relationship was strong enough to transform him into something different. She eventually concluded that they were simply too different, and she still, to this day, says she prays for him and for the country. Let that land for a moment. The woman whose heart got ripped out by her divorce from this man still prays for him. That is not bitterness. That is something far more complicated and far more human than simple bitterness could ever be. Now, let's talk about the bigger picture, because the Marla Maples story is interesting, but it really serves as the prologue to the story of Ivana Trump and what happened when the first marriage fell apart. And I want to spend some time on this because Ivana's story is the one that shaped everything. It is the one that created the tabloid version of Donald Trump that the country has been living with ever since. It is the one that set the template. And the details of it, when you lay them all out, are genuinely wild from start to finish. Ivana Trump was born in what was then Czechoslovakia. She was a competitive skier who left her home country and eventually made her way to New York, where she met Donald Trump at a Manhattan restaurant. They married that same year, and for the next 15 years, Ivana was not just Trump's wife, she was his business partner. She ran the Trump Castle Casino in Atlantic City. She oversaw the renovation and operations of the Plaza Hotel. She was a genuine executive at the Trump Organization, not a decorative spouse, not a trophy wife. She was doing real work, making real decisions, and building the empire right alongside him. And by all accounts, including her own, in her memoir, she was genuinely good at it. She said Trump trusted her judgment. She said she had real authority. She said she was proud of what they built together. And then the holiday season arrived. The Trumps were on their annual Christmas vacation in Aspen, Colorado, one of the glamorous destinations that defined their lifestyle. Ivana was at a restaurant at the ski resort when a young blonde woman walked up to her out of nowhere. The woman said, quote, "I'm Marla and I love your husband. Do you?" Ivana's response, also recorded in her memoir, was, "Get lost. I love my husband." It was unladylike, but I was in shock. That confrontation was the moment Ivana Trump's marriage effectively ended, even though the legal divorce would take 3 more years to finalize. Because what that encounter meant was that the affair, which had been going on for years without Ivana's knowledge, was now out in the open. And it was about to become the most covered tabloid story in New York City in years, maybe ever. The New York Post ran a headline that became one of the most infamous newspaper front pages in the history of American tabloid journalism. It quoted Marla Maples describing her relationship with Trump with 4 words that would echo through the decades. The headline was splashed across the front page in giant type. It was everywhere. Ivana writes in her memoir that she could not turn on the television without hearing her name. She describes the entire period as insane, and the fallout was not just for her. Donald Trump Jr., who was just a child when his parents' marriage collapsed, refused to speak to his father for an entire year after the divorce. Ivana writes that the children took the affair and the public spectacle of the divorce very hard. The family was torn apart loudly in front of the entire city of New York and a large chunk of the rest of the country. Now here's the part of the story that connects most directly to Trump's political life, and it is something that does not get talked about nearly enough. Ivana revealed in her memoir and in interviews around its release that Trump had long been interested in running for president, years before he actually did it. She says he received a letter from President Reagan encouraging him to consider a presidential run. She says he was always toying with the idea, but then the affair with Marla became public and the divorce became a scandal that played out on every front page in America for months. And according to Ivana, that killed any realistic chance of an early presidential run. She said, quote, "Every American woman hated him and every American hated him. There was no way he could run during the scandal time." That is Ivana Trump's assessment of what her divorce cost her husband politically. The man who is now president could have been president decades earlier, according to his own first wife, if he had not cheated on her. That is a genuinely remarkable thing for a former spouse to put in print. The divorce itself was settled several years later, and it is worth pausing for a moment to talk about the terms and what they tell you. Ivana received a package that included a substantial settlement. That is a significant sum, though not an extraordinary one for a 15-year marriage to someone of Trump's wealth at the time. She also received use of the family's Connecticut estate and other provisions. And crucially, the settlement came with a non-disclosure agreement, which limited what Ivana could say publicly about Trump and their marriage. That NDA is why in her memoir, she was deliberately careful about how she framed certain things. She wrote glowingly about their early years. She wrote proudly about their 3 children. She wrote about the pain of the affair in emotional terms. But she did not write a scorched earth account. She could not legally. The book that came out was the version of the story she was permitted to tell, filtered through legal constraints and also through her own genuine desire not to damage the children she had raised or the relationship she had rebuilt with their father. By the time the memoir came out, Ivana and Donald Trump were speaking on the phone approximately once a week. She told reporters she called him regularly and he called her. She offered advice on his television appearances. She told him to be more calm. He did not listen to that particular piece of advice. But the phone calls continued. She said they were the best of friends. She said they were proud of what they had built together as parents. Whether you believe all of that at face value or read it as someone making the best of a complicated situation, the fact that Ivana Trump spent her final years describing herself as good friends with the man who cheated on her publicly says something about both of them that is genuinely hard to categorize neatly. When Trump's second wife, Marla Maples, divorced him, she received significantly less than Ivana had received. She received a settlement with half of it designated specifically for housing. She also received annual payments for their daughter's care until the daughter turned 21, significantly less than what Ivana received for each of her 3 children. Those numbers are significant, not just as financial facts, but as a reflection of how Trump valued each relationship. Ivana spent 15 years building the business with him. Marla spent 6 years mostly being kept out of the business spotlight. The settlements reflected that in a way that Marla has been characteristically quiet about, even as she has described her heart being ripped out by the press coverage. And then there is one more piece of the Ivana story that resurfaced during Trump's 2016 campaign and never fully went away. In a deposition given during their divorce proceedings in the 1990s, Ivana used language that described an incident between her and Trump in terms that carried serious implications. She later clarified, and did so repeatedly and on the record, that she did not intend her words to be interpreted in a literal or criminal sense, and that she and Trump had become, in her words, the best of friends and good parents to their 3 children. She stood by that clarification consistently until her death. But the underlying deposition language continued to resurface whenever Trump's treatment of women became a news story because it existed in the record and journalists could find it. Ivana's position until the end of her life was that the marriage had been painful, the affair had been devastating, but she and Trump had made their peace and moved forward. Whether that peace felt genuine from the outside looking in is a separate question that the public has never fully agreed on. So let's bring all of this together and talk about what these stories actually tell us. Because there are several things you can draw from the history of Trump's first 2 marriages that connect directly to who he is as a political figure today. And all of them matter in understanding the full picture of this man. The first thing is the gap between the brand and the reality. Trump has spent his entire adult life marketing himself as a winner, as someone who dominates every situation, as someone who is always in complete control. The image is deliberately constructed to project strength, confidence, and dominance in every dimension of life, and that image has been extraordinarily effective politically. He has built an enormous coalition of supporters who believe in that image completely and who see him as the embodiment of the kind of decisiveness and toughness that they want in a leader. But the private history that Ivana and Marla have both described tells a story about a man whose most important personal relationships were defined by deception and pain. He cheated on his first wife for years while she was running his casinos and hotels and raising his children. He did it in a way that eventually became so public that it destroyed her marriage in a restaurant in Aspen in front of a crowd of people. He then married the other woman, had another child, and that marriage also ended in divorce. Meanwhile, through all of it, he kept projecting the image of the winner, the deal maker, the man on top of the world. The gap between the public image and the private reality is part of what makes his story so compelling to so many people and so troubling to others. Ivana's memoir captured this gap with remarkable restraint. She wrote glowingly about the good years of their marriage. She was not trying to destroy him. She was trying to tell a complicated truth about a complicated man. And the complicated truth is that the same qualities that made him effective in business, the relentlessness, the need to dominate, the refusal to show vulnerability, also made him destructive in intimate relationships in ways that left real scars on real people. Now, let's also talk about one thing that often gets glossed over when this story is told, which is what all of these personal upheavals reveal about Trump's operating style. Because there is a consistent pattern in how he handled each of these marriages. In each case, he pursued what he wanted with total focus and without apparent concern for the collateral damage to others. He fell for Marla while still married to Ivana and pursued that relationship for years, apparently without serious conflict about the dishonesty involved, right up until the moment it was exposed in Aspen. He then married Marla and had a child with her and built a life with her. And when that marriage started to falter, he moved on again, this time meeting his current wife during the period of his divorce proceedings from Marla. The pattern across all 3 marriages is of a man who is fully in when he is in, who builds something real in each relationship, but who also exits when the relationship no longer serves his needs, and who has consistently done better in business than in his personal life in terms of managing long-term commitments. That pattern is relevant context for understanding Trump, the president, because the same drive and the same disregard for conventional limits that produce those personal decisions also characterizes how he operates politically. The difference is that in politics, the exits are harder to arrange, and the consequences of burning bridges can be severe in ways that a private divorce settlement cannot fully resolve. His ex-wives absorb the personal cost of his particular brand of relentlessness. On the political stage, that cost is distributed across a much wider landscape. And that is something worth keeping in mind whenever the personal and the political converge in conversations about who this man really is. The second thing is what the public disputes between Trump's current and former wives revealed about the atmosphere surrounding his presidency. Because the public exchange that erupted when Ivana was promoting her memoir is one of the more revealing moments of Trump's time in office, and it does not get enough attention. Ivana appeared on a morning television program and joked that she was basically the first Trump wife, and therefore the first lady. She said she had a direct number to the White House but did not want to use it because she did not want to cause any kind of jealousy. She delivered the whole thing with a laugh. She clearly meant it as a playful comment about her unique position as Trump's original wife. The First Lady's office did not take it that way at all. Within hours, a spokeswoman released a blistering statement calling Ivana's comment attention-seeking and self-serving noise, noting that the current First Lady uses her title to help children, not sell books. Ivana later said the First Lady went bananas over the comment and that she had no idea why something so clearly joking had sparked such a fierce response. The exchange was remarkable for several reasons. It was unprecedented in American political history to see a president's current wife and former wife publicly trading barbs in real time. It exposed the level of tension inside the Trump world that the carefully managed public image was supposed to conceal. And it reminded the country that behind the formal choreography of presidential life, there was a genuinely messy human situation involving multiple ex-spouses, multiple sets of children, and a first lady who was visibly sensitive about her position in a way that suggested the security of that position was not always taken for granted. The third thing is what all of this tells us about the women themselves and why their stories keep coming back into public conversation, even years and even decades later. Marla Maples is now in her 60s. She left New York to protect her daughter from the spotlight. She returned quietly years later. She lives a life largely removed from political drama. She prays for her ex-husband. She describes her years in the press as having ripped her heart out, and she still shows up in conversations about Trump with this quality of quiet dignity and unresolved pain that is genuinely moving if you pay attention to it. She thought she could change him. She could not. She moved on, but the pain did not fully go away. Ivana spent the years after her divorce rebuilding herself into a businesswoman and socialite who was comfortable in her own identity and who had, by the time of her death, genuinely made peace with Trump and with the life they had shared. She talked to him once a week. She encouraged him to keep using social media. She said they were the best of friends and good parents. She died at the age of 73 after a tragic accident at her New York home. The image at her funeral of her children mourning their mother alongside a public that had watched their parents' marriage collapse in tabloid headlines decades earlier was one of the stranger and more human moments of recent political life. The story of Trump's marriages is, at its core, a story about what happens when enormous ambition and enormous personal appetite collide with the ordinary human need for love, stability, and decency. The women who lived through that collision have never stopped being interesting witnesses to it, and as long as Trump remains in the center of American political life, their voices are going to keep finding their way back into the conversation. Because the personal history never really stays in the past. It lives on in the people who experienced it, in the children who grew up in its shadow, and in the public record that continues to grow with every new revelation. The human cost of all that ambition is real, and the women who paid it have been telling us about it for decades. It's worth listening to what they have to say.